welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today I have another amazing special guest episode. I had the absolute pleasure to speak with Reese Zahner, also known as Cleo Childs. She has an album dropping today, which is, I'm so glad this worked out perfectly that I could have the conversation with her, get it edited, and make sure it got out in time for the actual physical exact day of the release of her album. And her album is spoken word poetry called Moving With, and I'll have links in the description, but this will be available on Spotify and I believe Amazon Music, Apple Music. It's I don't know. Is it iTunes, Apple? I don't know what it's called. I don't have an iPhone. But it's available on streaming services. She wants this to be available. But she has written the most beautiful poetry during her journey of grief she experienced after losing her mother to Alzheimer's when she was only 28 years old. There's so much more you can read about her on her website. It's cleochilds.com. That's spelled C-L-E-O, Childs, C-H-I-L-D-S.com. And I will have links in the description. So please, please, please go check that out and listen to her poetry. I cried. I legit cried. You'll hear coming up in her interview, she reads a couple pieces, and I really did choke up. It was very emotional. But you'll get to hear that here in just a moment. Before we dive in, got to do my thing. I got to remind you about my Patreon. You can support me on Patreon if you go to patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. All the funds I receive go to me providing pro bono services to those who cannot afford them. So I would love to have your support. For as little as $1 a month, you can be helping me out. For higher tiers, you get early access to my podcast. Everybody gets grief affirmations. I'll do check-ins. I've done Q&As. So yeah, come check that out. All right, that's not why you're here. You're here to hear this amazing conversation with this beautiful, beautiful human. Here we are with Reese Zahner, aka Cleo Childs. Thank you everybody for tuning in this week. I'm very excited to have another super special guest with me. I have Reese Zahner, also known as Cleo Childs. Reese, and I pronounce Zahner, is Zahner, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's about a 50% shot of Zahner or Zahner, and
I
you went
was
with the
thinking
50
Zahner in
that,
my head. So
yeah, it means tooth, which is German. So we come from a family of dentists.
that's
So
amazing.
mhm.
I didn't know
I'm not a dentist. It was definitely generations back, but I do, out of reverence, go to the dentist, every 6 months I try to.
That's very good of you. It's good of you to do that.
I feel like the ancestors would be like, "What are you doing?" We were a family of dentists.
We did this. We did this for you. Oh, shucks. Okay. Well, thank you for agreeing to, be on my show to talk about your loss and your mom. So I'm going to give you the floor here for a second. I'd like to hear a little bit about your mom, like why you're here, what your story is, and what you're going to talk to us about today.
Yeah, and just I know myself well enough. I've lived in my body, lived with myself for 30 years, that as much as I love to be a Cliff Notes person, I am more of a Tolstoy writer. War and Peace is more my speed. So I'll try to keep it brief, but knowing that I'll do my best, but that's typically an attempt, not an execution. But yeah, I lost my mom 2.5 years ago to early onset Alzheimer's. She got diagnosed when I was 21. It was incredibly difficult. I was 21 when she got diagnosed, and I lost her over the course of about 5 to 6 years. And then she died suddenly. She was supposed to have 2 more years of life expectancy. And I got the call on Halloween that she had passed in her sleep.
Oh my
And
God.
so about 2.5 years ago. And then I went into, and I thought that I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so I thought that I could do grief perfectly. That was what I set out to do because I had grieved for so long, for 5 years of like the long grief, anticipatory grief, that
Yeah.
I thought, and I had sudden grief, I thought, oh, I can do this. I've done it for so long, I can do this. So I bought all these books. I bought all these, workbooks. I literally watched anthropological studies about grief on YouTube and learned about the science of grief. And I realized I was still really upset and I was grieving and everything. And I was miserable and I was really upset. And then I started to, there was one night I heard two lines in my head, and I just went downstairs about 2:30 and I wrote my first poem. And that was basically became my lifeline. Through about definitely the first 6 months, I went into what I call the cave, which is just pure isolation. I did not talk to anyone for about 6 months. My world condensed. I woke up, I wrote, I went to work, I wrote, I went to sleep. I did that in perpetuity for about 6 months.
Wow.
And I wrote for about 2.5 years, and I did it for me, honestly. It became my lifeline to myself and to the outside world because I was so hurting that poetry became the only way that I could make it hurt less,
Mhm.
for a little bit, not make it better. It would just hurt less because I could have it outside of my body and then I could look at it and then I could be able to process it. And I felt like I completed something, right? I would feel proud, or at least proud in the fact that it was truthful to me in my experience.
Mhm.
And I did that. And then I found out, maybe about 3 or 4 months ago at this point, which is crazy. I got in contact with a producer from Nashville, and I didn't know I was a good poet by any stretch. And he said I was good and he would produce me. And
Oh,
then I
wow.
got on that's how I got on this journey. And so I went out to Nashville and recorded my album. I wrote it I took all the poems that, I wrote over the course of 2.5 years, and I put them in such a way that I really want to explain the emotions of grief, how grief to me flows like a river.
Mhm.
And I wanted to explain how someone could go from being so angry and disillusioned with God into having peace and acceptance, which I do now, from an emotional standpoint, because when I was in grief at the very beginning, when I just lost her and I was so angry, I couldn't understand how anyone could get to peace and acceptance. And I
Yeah.
couldn't look to anyone who could. And I thought, how in the hell is this going to happen?
Yeah.
And what I hope to do with the poetry, is to emotionally, I put it in such a way, emotionally, you go through the river of grief. So at least you can understand my journey through the emotions into how I ended up with peace and acceptance
Yeah.
from the starting point, or not from the starting point of with anger, but from the depths of anger, how one could go emotionally to that other place.
Yeah. Oh, wow. What a cool gift too. So do you have a background with I almost said history. That's stupid. With with writing and poetry, or is this like brand new to you when this happened?
It was brand new to me, but my mother was an
Wow.
English major,
Okay.
and my grandmother was an English teacher for 30 years, and she has a master's in English, and she's edited my work since I was 18.
Oh.
So my grandmother, which is her mother, my mom's
Hmm.
mom, she edited all my poetry.
Oh,
And
wow.
so for all the grammar, and I would call her and I would say, Grandma, I read a new poem. And we worked on editing it, and it was about my mom. And so my mom's mom helped me edit it, the poems and everything about my mom. So I come by English naturally in regards to, I grew up with my mom, or my grandmother made me memorize poems by Robert Frost. And I grew up with a diction, like I carried a dictionary around
Yeah.
like a really nerdy, weird kid.
Hmm.
And, I know how to, I was obsessed with reading. That was when I was growing up. I read, and you would find me in like a Borders bookstore, and they would just leave me, for hours, and I would go and read,
Yeah.
which was probably against Borders bookstores policy, but no one seemed to bother me because I would just read all their books, which
Yeah.
without, but I would go to the library, and, so I really became, when I was growing up, I was a vivacious reader. And I just loved reading. And then I never wrote creatively. If I was to write anything in college, I'm a marketing major. I can write
Oh,
a
wow.
damn good research paper, but never really creative writing. And then literally, I just woke up one day in the middle of the night, after mom had passed, and I heard two words or two sentences in my head. And I went down and I wrote my first poem, and it made me feel a little bit better. And then I just kept doing that for
Wow.
about 2.5 years.
That's so great. That's so cool. So do you mind sharing what those two lines were that you
Yeah.
thought of?
Yeah, I wrote I have the same book that I
Oh,
write
wow.
everything in. So it's kind of like an anthology,
Okay.
of everything that I wrote. So I can literally go back and see everything.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
write it
Oh,
first. Um, It's the first one I wrote was the first two lines is I'm broken and incomplete, finding solace in my defeat. And then I wrote my first ever poem, which was the past siren song sings safe, the future such a sharp object to embrace. Oh, how to live, not survive, feels like fool's gold to thrive. The world is daunting and obtrusive, happiness appearing more elusive. Is this my fate, my bane to bear, to suffer the loss of her red hair? Turn to white, turn to ash, memories exchanged for cold hard cash. Is this my fate to succumb, to turn my soul and mind numb, or to persevere and ensnare all of life's greatness with care? The path's obscured, the cobblestones bare, uncertainty rushes through her red hair, which I am now shackled to wear. That was the first poem that I wrote.
I'm tearing up a little bit. That's beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
love that. Oh my gosh. Woo.
Yeah,
Yeah, got a little misty there. That was lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
you're welcome.
So I would like to hear a little bit about your mom. First of all, what was your mom's name?
Her name was Candace.
Candace. Oh, I love that
Hmm.
name. So tell me
Yeah,
a little bit about Candace, about mom and what she was like prior to her diagnosis.
mom was very gentle. My mother, when she passed, the number one thing that everyone said is that she was kind. Is my mother was a very kind woman, and she was. My mother was very gentle. She was very soft spoken. She was very kind. She loved children. She wanted to be a mom more than anything in the world, and she loved being my mother. She
Mhm.
loved it. Um, in regards to supportive, you cannot find a more supportive mom than mine. But my mother was never one to stand out in a crowd. My mother was very much one to be a helper. My mother was not a leader, but my mother was a helper. And I think growing up, I used to think that was a failure of hers, is that she was a helper. And I think that there's more as I've grown older. I wish that I could tell her is that I think that's a great strength in order. There's great strength in helping, and there's great strength in kindness, and there's great strength in gentleness.
Mhm.
And my mother was strong, not in the way that we think about strength typically, but my mother was strong in her softness, quite honestly. She was a beautiful woman. My mother was beautiful. She had red hair, and she was a flight attendant back in the 70s and the 80s when you really
Oh, how
had to be
cool.
beautiful,
Yeah.
to do it. It was a very glamorous job. My mother
Hmm.
had glamour shots and things like that, but my mother was beautiful. But above all, my mother was incredibly kind,
Hmm.
and she took our education very seriously. My mother wanted us to be happy. I think above all, my mother always wanted our happiness, and she wanted us to be good people, and she wanted to give us everything that she could in order for our dreams to come true. When my mother got diagnosed, I went out the next semester. I said, I'm not going to go. I got an internship in Texas, and I said, I'm not going to go. And she said, you should go. Don't stay here because of me. My mother never wanted to be a burden on anyone. I think that that's the thing. My mother never wanted her diagnosis to be a burden. And because she encouraged me to go to Texas, she got diagnosed in September. I started my internship. I left to go to Texas to start my internship. I met my husband when I was out here. And then when I came back to finish up school after the internship, I went back to be with her every weekend because I lived an hour away in Dahlonega, Georgia, where I went to school, and she lived in Atlanta. And when it got time, she was still relatively she's still cognizant. She had or she was becoming and having starting to have dementia. But she said, "You have to go out. Do not stay here because of me. You have to go be with him." And so she let me go. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that my mother ever gave is my
Yeah.
mother wanted to make sure that I was happy and
Yeah.
that I lived my own life and that she was not a burden. And I think that it was a very great gift that my mother gave me is the freedom to go and to follow. And I now like I live in Texas with my husband who I met, and I have the most amazing husband in the whole world. And I
Oh,
have a dog that I love, and I have neighbors, and I have hobbies, and I'm very, very, very happy. And I don't feel any guilt because of the life that I have because she let me go have the life.
yeah. Oh, oh, that's beautiful. I kind of feel like that's almost just a mom thing in general to like, or parent thing to want better for your children than you had, right? And to want them to live their life happily and as fully as possible. So, I love that's beautiful though, and I'm glad you don't feel guilty about that because I work with the dying. I work with people who are dying, and I get a lot of, parents saying, and I'm sorry, my cat is scratching himself and his collar is jingling, so I don't know if that you can hear that. It's very distracting to me. Anyway, I hear a lot of I don't want to be a burden to my kids, and I don't want them to worry about me. I just want them to be happy. And then there's so much guilt from the kids that are like, yeah, but I can't just leave my parent, and let them
Hmm.
suffer alone or go through whatever end of life alone. So it sounds like you guys had a really good relationship that you both could love and respect that about each other.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I absolutely did. I adored my mother. Um, and I think I adore her more as I grow older, which is
Mhm.
really the shame, is that there's so much I wish I could tell her. I wish that I could, I wish I could just, I wrote in a poem this idea of I wish I could tell her I understand now. I think I never really understood my mother beforehand. And I
Mhm.
understand her now and I appreciate her, I think, so much more for the gifts that she had.
Yeah.
And, and actually, I realized I could just tell you who my mother was in poetry, if that's all right, because it's one of the poems I wrote was to
Yeah,
my mother as Zach
absolutely.
Capster.
Please, please.
Um, My child's mind splintered when told my angel mother was not anointed. My child's mind couldn't comprehend. No angels or demons came to claim her. She was a woman completely incomplete, a tapestry of talents to wrap myself in. She didn't hang the moon, she swung from it, softly on a swing crafted by woodland fairies, whose kitsch houses she made as a child. Georgia red clay flowed through her veins, coursing when catching crick salamanders under the watchful eye of her stick horse. My sister and I fell asleep to her lullabies, sung by her gentle voice, rivaling chimes, rocking us as she swung above the world.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Oh my goodness, I love that. That yeah,
Yeah.
I can just picture her too in my and I did look through your website a little bit. So I saw the pictures of her on your website as well. So she was very beautiful for sure.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about when you heard about her diagnosis.
Hmm. I was in disbelief.
Mhm.
I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend. I was an intern. I did a lot of internships in college, and I was an intern at a company called Cloud Sherpas. And I had the most amazing team. I was an intern that was assigned to a team. And I'm so grateful that I had them because when she got diagnosed, well, so what happened was in the summer, we recognized that we thought that her memory was going. And they went and they did some memory tests initially. And
Mhm.
they came back, and I heard that the memory tests were very, very, very low,
Mhm.
and that she most likely had Alzheimer's. Um, and during the summer, I remember I went home. I was living in Atlanta, in downtown Atlanta, in my grandmother's apartment that she let me live in. I was going to have this great summer in my grandmother's apartment. I was early 20s. And I remember I got there and I cried and I called my cousin who lived at Georgia Tech, or who went to Georgia Tech. He's like a brother to me. And I just said, I can't, she have to come over. And I just sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed. And the next day I went to my internship. I went to my internship and I said, I went in, I was very professional and, I wanted to be very professional. I had this big job and this is what I need to do. And I went into my manager and I just said, I think my mother has Alzheimer's. And he said, Reese, what are you doing here? And I said, but I have to keep going. I have to keep going. It's like, I have a job. I have to. And he goes, Reese,
Yeah.
what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And and then I talked to the rest of the members, and they said, your life changed yesterday.
Mhm.
You don't know it, but your life changed. And it did. And I think that I didn't understand fully. And then when she got fully diagnosed was in September, it was September of October of 2015. And it was my midterms week is when I got the diagnosis that they did a spinal tap and they found the protein that said that she had Alzheimer's. And I went to my professors and I said, can I move this, please? My mother just got diagnosed. And one professor, and I understand, she said, are you sure that this is what is going on? Are you sure? I think, and I look at it now and I understand why she said that. She was questioning if I was telling the truth or not, if I had made this up, because if it's so abnormal, and I don't blame her, it's incredibly
Sure.
abnormal. I was 21 trying to get out, she said, you're trying to get out of a midterm. I probably heard everything under the sun,
Oh, yeah.
but the, they all allowed me to move my midterm. And
Oh,
I went and I had to be the one to tell the entire family that she got the diagnosis.
oh,
And I would not wish that on anyone, is to go and to let the family know that my mother got what her diagnosis was. But I felt like as the eldest, it was my responsibility somehow. Like I felt like it was me taking care of her
yeah.
for the first time. And so that kind of changed from that relationship as I started to take care of her. We
Hmm.
started to take care of her. She took care of us. And that was the first kind of thing I did where I started to take care of her. I mean, during that summer, I gave up my room at my grandmother's apartment in Midtown Atlanta that I was really excited, and I moved back in with my mom,
Yeah.
and all of the we went to we went to all the appointments. That we went to Emory, which was they had an amazing brain center, memory care center, and we went to all the appointments. And I kept my internship. I did it all throughout the fall coming into that, and I did 4 classes on top of that. And I went to be with my mom, and we went to all of the memory care appointments, and I did it. And I got all A's that semester. And you just, you somehow make it happen. You just,
Hmm.
when it comes to the diagnosis, I just remember not understanding
Yeah.
because I didn't understand. I didn't understand the magnitude. Everyone else around me understood the magnitude. And I knew I didn't, because I didn't know too much about Alzheimer's and any of that. My grandfather had it, it's genetic in our family. But with my mom, I was just like, that doesn't, there was
Yeah.
no way that I could understand
Well, and she was
what.
so young too.
She was in her late 50s.
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Maybe 60s, late 50s, maybe 60.
Yeah.
Because she
Yeah.
passed at 66.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can fully respect and understand just not grasping it. I wouldn't either. Someone in my life very close to me, her husband was diagnosed when he was barely over 50, with early onset Alzheimer's. That's yeah. And it's interesting. I've chatted with her and I've chatted with other people I know who have parents or spouses or,
Mhm.
close relatives that have Alzheimer's, and that shift in role where you
Mhm.
are going from being cared for to being the caregiver with that person. So, how did that affect you, suddenly finding yourself in a bit of a role reversal with your mom being her caregiver?
It affected me. I didn't know what I was doing, right? I went to all of these classes and I thought I knew, but there's no way to know until you're in it, I think. And it was trial by fire, quite honestly.
Mhm.
And there were some really tough times. I think, the thing that comes up for me is this idea of she did not want she wanted to drive and have her independence. And
Yeah.
we knew that we had to take that away. I
Mhm.
knew that we had to take it away because she was a liability. At
Yeah.
that point, if she got into a car crash, she would get sued. There was no doubt, and she wouldn't want also to be in a position where she was doing any harm. My mother never wanted to do harm, but
Right.
she wanted her independence. And I remember there was a huge battle. My mother, and that lasted for a while, as my mother kept saying, I want my car keys. And we said, you can't have them. Well, I want my car keys, we can't have them. And it was this constant loop of something that she wanted, not remembering why she couldn't have it. And I think that, you know, there were a lot of times where you learn how to go with the flow. I think it's one of the things. I am not, before my mother's diagnosis, I was pretty, I was a certain kind of person. The person I am after my grief is different from the person I am before, but definitely the person I was after my diagnosis is different from the person I was before. Before I was, kind of rigid, I would say. And then afterwards, I learned how to go with the flow in regards to everything doesn't have to be perfect. We're
Mhm.
just going to do our best. I I made a lot of mistakes and I felt a lot of shame because I would get frustrated and I would say, Mom, I'm so sorry. And she would immediately forgive me, you know? And I think it was all just, it was, how do you deal? It's you deal with the hard the best way that you know how.
Yeah.
And you have to ask a lot of grace from others and you have to ask a lot of grace from yourself.
Hmm.
And I think that I struggled with asking grace for myself a lot more than asking grace from my mom because I knew that my mom would always give it. And I would feel there were some times where I would just go, I'm the worst daughter in the face of the earth.
Um,
And my mother would go, No, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. But I think that I was also a perfectionist and I wanted to do something so perfectly, which is to take care of her. And
yeah.
I couldn't because there is no perfect. There's
Right.
only, of course, doing the best that one can do in a hard situation. And you just try to do the best and you ask for grace. And I, over time, got better with asking for grace and I got better with letting go of a lot of things. Like, we don't have to talk about what I want to talk about. Let's just talk about, and we don't have to, you don't have to remember. And I learned how to be happy with just eventually changing into this role. And she forgot who I was. I became a nice lady, right? And I became happy
Hmm.
with being a nice person, right? If I could just be a nice person that my mom likes to hang out with and
Yeah.
treats her nicely, then that's okay. I can be that, you know? And I think that that whole shift in regards to taking care of someone, but also them not knowing who you are and learning to be okay with those roles and learning just to be like, okay, we're gonna do our best and I'm gonna be a nice lady that my mom wants to hang out with and that she enjoys and feels like she can be safe with. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna do that and that's okay.
Oh, how beautiful for you to just be able to accept that with grace because so many people fight that. And I mean, the last thing you want to do to somebody with Alzheimer's is upset them by constantly correcting them. Be like, no, I'm your daughter. Like to just accept that and go with it, but also to like be okay with it because, you still get to be with your mom, whether or not she recognizes you or not. You still get to be there and be in that role. So, oh, kudos to you for embracing that and accepting it.
Thank
Um,
you.
what about your
It took,
other? I'm sorry, were you gonna say
oh, I
something?
was just gonna say it took time to get there,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't instantaneous, it wasn't overnight. And
Oh
there was
yeah.
remorse and there was grief around the idea of I'm not, she doesn't know who I am anymore, right?
Hmm.
But I think that what was more important to me is that she's with a nice lady. I had to put my ego
Yeah.
to the side. I had to put my
Yeah.
ego to the side. It's not even, I guess ego might, I don't know if ego is the exact perfect word, but I had to put my expectations. I think
Right.
expectations probably is the better word. The expectations, because what the expectation was and the reality was were two separate things.
Yeah.
And I had to accept the reality of the situation rather than what my wishful, hopeful expectations were.
Yeah, well, and to see it from her perspective too, you could either be this nice, kind lady who helps take care of her, or be some scary woman who keeps screaming at her, claiming she's your daughter, Like,
Yeah.
uh so I was gonna ask how your other family members dealt with this. Like, were they around? Do you have siblings? And
I have a younger
her mom is
sister.
still alive, correct?
So I have a younger sister.
Okay.
Her name is Lainey. And I think that Lainey and my mom weren't as close as mom and I were. So, and also Lainey was off over in Thailand. So my sister is,
Jeez.
and Lainey, when she got diagnosed, my sister was, she got an amazing opportunity to be a student ambassador for the State Department.
Oh
And she went
wow.
and she lived in a rural village in Thailand for her senior year. And so, you know, she, the executive decision was made. We didn't want to burden Lainey, so we didn't really tell her until she came back.
Mhm.
And with my, I think everyone dealt with it differently. I think there's grief with everything. Everyone grieves
Right.
differently. Everyone dealt with it differently. I think that there was many different ways of what we wanted for mom, but I think at the end of the day, we all wanted the best for her,
Yeah.
right? And I think that there, it's hard. It's an incredibly difficult situation when sometimes what you want and what someone else wants seem to be complete opposites, but you
Yep.
both know that you're coming at it from the exact perspective of you want the best for them, and you just have different ideas of what that best thing is. You
Yeah.
know, I think that, but at the end of the day, you have to understand and respect the where they're coming from because it's coming out of love from my mother,
Mhm.
and we all love my mother, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely we all had our own journeys with it,
Mhm.
and I can only speak to my journey with it, but I know that we all wanted the best for her. And sometimes we had different ideas of what that felt like or what that meant. But I think at the end of the day, we all respected the fact that we loved her. And that's why we were all kind of thinking maybe differently. But we were all coming at it from that unified point of just
Yeah.
wanting the best for her.
Yeah. Oh. Was it hard for your grandmother? I would assume so.
I would assume so. My grandmother is one of the last of her kind, is what I like to say. My grandmother, and I will not divulge how my grandmother's age because she will listen to
Nope,
this.
you don't have to. I
And
get
I
it.
will, and she would be very upset that I even know because it's a very harsh kept secret, which I do not know, Gigi. When you're listening to this, I don't know. I promise. I don't. I'm so sorry. I accidentally spoiled myself there. I actually do know, but because I used to go treasure diving, I used to call it, and I found her birth book, but she wasn't. I used to go, and so I know what the date is. But my grandmother is a steel magnolia. I call her the Julie Andrews of the South. My
Oh,
grandmother is a steel magnolia from Georgia,
I love that.
and she is as sharp as a tack, you know, and she made us listen. We read poetry growing up. She read the comics to me. And I have the greatest, utmost respect for my grandmother. She's the matriarch of our family, you
Mhm.
know, and she keeps us all in line. And grandma has the most sense ever given to a person, ever bestowed upon a person. Grandma has common sense like no one has ever had. So when grandma you come to grandma with a problem, grandma will go and research it. I like to say I'm the second best researcher in the country compared to my the first being my grandma because
Oh,
grandma
wow.
will research the solution and grandma will tell you what you need to do and then you do what grandma tells you to do because what grandma told you to do is the optimal best move for you to do it. So you go and you do it and you listen to grandma. I think grandma also is we call her name is Gigi. Her name is Geraldine. So her nickname is for us was Gigi.
Mm.
Gigi keeps her cards very close to her chest. Gigi is one of these, we call them Gigi pats. You know,
Okay.
Gigi hugs, doesn't hug. We pat each other on the back. And you know that's a big hug, you know? I
Oh,
think and Gigi, one of my favorite things Gigi ever did. It's so true though. She determined that we are such bad singers as a family that we don't need to subject ourselves to ourselves. So Gigi said that we don't sing happy birthday, we Gregorian chant it, which really freaked out my husband the first time he came over for a birthday party. And we all chant happy birthday. We don't sing it because we are that bad that we don't. Gigi said
oh
we don't need to
no.
subject ourselves to ourselves. We'll chant happy birthday and we all just clap and chant. And then I warned Kevin, my husband, but he didn't, you know,
Never
apparently
really.
there's no preparation you can warn for a Gregorian chant and happy birthday. But I think she took it hard. I think my grandmother had to take it hard. You
Yeah.
know, it's your daughter. It's she
Right.
my mother.
Yeah.
How else could you do it? I
Yeah.
think, you know, we bonded over, I think we were always close, but I think we probably bonded over the loss of my mother more than we ever had. It was her daughter, it was my mother, it was also my sister's mother, but I was, you know, I was close with my mom than
Yeah.
he was. And and yeah, I think that it must have been incredibly difficult. We
Yeah.
talk about it sometimes, but
Yeah.
I think that only she knows the
Right.
level of how difficult it was.
Right. Yeah, I lost my only brother back in 2015 and my mom and I talk about it a lot. We didn't used to. It took us a while to be able to talk about it, but my dad very rarely. He's very stoic and he very rarely talks about it. And and I can't my dad, I don't not to get too graphic, he's the one that found my brother. And I can't imagine the trauma he's been through with this, but he's keeping that to himself and we respect that, you know. So I respect that if people don't want to show their their hand, so to speak, and want to keep that to themselves as long as they're okay, you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about your album, which is going to be releasing the day this podcast airs. So, tell us
Yeah.
a bit
So
about that.
it's been a accumulation of 2.5 years worth of work. It's the best of the 14 tracks of 2.5 years about my journey with my mother. I pared them down, and it tells the story of what it was like to have my mother, to lose her, to go through the grief, and then to end in the peace and acceptance that I have now. And I really hoped with the album to be able to help, as I said earlier, like help someone understand how someone could go from anger into peace and acceptance, because that was something that I could never understand, is how someone could go from the depths of anger into peace and acceptance when I was in it.
Mhm.
And I hope it can be one that people can see truth in, and they know it's truthful. I actually have I have amazing editors. My grandmother is an editor of mine. Cherie from Global Songwriters is an editor of mine, and Mary Gaucher is an editor of mine. And each has brought their own special, just amazing sauce to making it the sum of its parts, more than the sum of its parts. And one of the things that was really important to me is that it is truthful and honest. And so Mary actually went and she edited it for truth and for honesty. And so we went over every line to make sure that every word is exactly right, that every word is perfectly
Oh,
placed, that it is so true, because I feel like people in grief, am I allowed to do a slight curse on this
oh
podcast?
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
yeah.
okay?
You're fine.
Okay. People in grief have a bullshit meter,
Okay.
right? And they can spot bullshit a mile away. And the last thing I wanted to do is to bullshit someone in grief. And so we went over every line to make sure that every line was truthful. Then the fact that there is no bullshit, that
Yeah.
it is a true account of what my grief was like. And it's a true account about what I felt the entire way through. Um, you know, and do you mind if I read you the interlude at the very beginning, which is the first thing that I start off with, kind of like the for the author? Is that all
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
Please.
the album starts with um, physics says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. I believe my mother follows the same rules. She is lost to me in body, but I find her spirit inhabiting those around me. I am grateful for her kindness when it is given to me. I appreciate her gentleness when someone treats me gently. I admire her courage when I watch others be courageous. She is everywhere when I allow myself to see her. When I open myself to her, she pours in. My mother grants me an audience every time I catch my reflection. She escapes through my eyes, their shade reminiscent of the magnolia tree she planted. Her laughter hibernates in my throat, dormant until someone clever entertains her. She leaks from my fingertips, a tap of wisdom I welcome to overflow on my page. The words she mispronounced in my presence, I butcher with a new audience. During her passing, she molded me, shaping me into her earthly vessel. I'm her legacy, the incarnation of her life's work, her representative to life.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Oh, whew. I
Thank
got a
you.
little chills. I resemble my mom a lot, and I know I see her sometimes when I look at myself, and it's going to be that much more poignant when she's no longer with me.
Yeah, everyone says I look like my mom, and I think too is that that's the first if you want to call them song, or yeah, I
Yeah.
can't sing as we've already determined, but I can recite, and then it's going to be
Yeah.
over music. So I had the most amazing band come in,
Oh,
the
how
most
cool.
amazing musicians. They came in, and so they were so inspirational, and they were so wonderful. They were handpicked to, I think, be on this project, and they were just, it really helped to elevate all the work and the words that I did. And I think it's better, than I have ever could have expected it to be. And it's more than I ever could have expected it to be. And it's definitely because of the work of a lot of people that put a lot of care and thought into it. Not just me, but a lot of people put a lot of themselves into it. And so if, it's a reflection on all of us.
Oh, wow. That's, I love that. So before we wrap up and before I let you talk a little bit more about your album, where people can get it, I have a tradition on my podcast. At the end of the episode, I pull a random card from the death deck. These are
Hmm.
conversation starter questions around death and dying. So I'm going to pull one at random here, and then I will let you answer it, and then I will answer it as well. And oh God, oh, I said we weren't going to talk politics. The question on this card is, do you believe in the death penalty? Yes, it's an eye for
Oh,
an eye, or no, life in prison is enough for me. And you don't have to pick one of those answers. You can answer that any way you would like. That's a hard question.
I believe in the capacity to change. I think suffering, what I've learned is suffering is the greatest teacher.
Hmm.
I think it's also up to the individual to
Hmm.
learn and to see if they can change or not.
Yeah.
I think that I don't have the answer, but I think that, and I don't know what I believe, but what I do believe is that people through suffering have the capacity to change for the better.
Hmm.
And I believe that I have been given the opportunity to change.
Hmm.
And I believe maybe other people can, but I also can, I believe that other people should be given the opportunity to change. But I also know that change has to come from the individual.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can't come. And that's the thing is that I think for me, everything, it's hard for me to generalize when I think something is a case by case. Every individual is separate. Every experience is separate. Every person is separate. Every change can be separate. And so, in which case, I think that I can't answer to a general,
Yeah.
is it right or wrong, because I feel like it's a lot more nuanced. And I appreciate the nuances, but I do believe in change. I believe in change through suffering. I
Yeah.
believe in the ability to transform, but I also believe that it has to come from the individual.
Hmm.
And that's the best answer that I have.
No, that's a great answer. And my answer is pretty similar to that because I hate it when people ask me this question. Because I can't say definitively yes or definitively no, right? I think it's really such a gray area in a case by case basis. And I'm with you. I'm all about, you know, attempt rehabilitation as best you can first, give people an opportunity to change because I totally agree. Everybody has the capability to change, but they have to want to. And that's not saying like somebody did like the most awful thing they could do and they refuse to change that we should automatically take that power within ourselves to end their life. I can't say definitively yes or no. So yeah, I always feel like it's a cop out answer, but I always just say I don't say one way or another.
I
Whether
also think that I'm not one, it shouldn't come down like I
yeah,
know that there's a thing about like opinions or, but there's a lot of things where I recognize that maybe I'm not the best person to be able to have an opinion on a topic because I'm
yeah,
not as educated about it as someone else is.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and so I think that I know what I believe, but I also
Mhm.
know that I probably don't need to be the one to make the changes or to make
Yeah,
the rulings about it because I am not as educated on the topic as someone else
yeah.
has that has a lot more education.
Hmm.
And that I could be completely wrong in regards to, there's probably a counterpoint to every point that I just said, and which from someone that knows more about it. So I would, I but I have experience from my own life that I think might be applicable, but also I recognize that there is something that are beyond me, experiences and knowledge that I don't have that might counterpoint everything I just said. And I have to
Yeah,
respect that and to know about it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Ooh, well, that was a deep end to this. Usually they're not that deep, but that's okay. I appreciate that from time to time. So
I love deep questions. I do.
I do
I
too. They have their time and their place. So,
I am like I know myself well enough. I am not I'm a very deep person. I like to go deep. I'm
okay.
okay with like, I'm not a very good small talker.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
a
yeah.
very good deep talker.
Well, and
Like,
I talk about death and dying all the time. So I'm real fun at parties. Uh, well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your story. I'm going to give you the floor for a couple minutes here. Please let people know where they can find you, where they can find your album, and anything else you want to share.
Yeah, so you can find me on cleochilds.com. So CleoChilds.com. I decided that, back when I was in my teens, I said if I ever do anything, like artistic, I'm going to have a pseudonym. And so Cleo Childs comes from my middle name is Cleo,
Okay.
and Childs is my grandmother's maiden name, who's my editor. and it's her maiden name, and it's a name that died out in our family.
Oh,
So
wow.
there were no males to carry it on, and so I'm bringing back and honoring my family name by
Oh,
putting it in. And so I'm Cleo Childs. So I'm honoring my, and also Cleo is a family name. That was my great grandmother's name. So I'm very, reminiscent of my family. But also, I just thought it would sound nice and cool. And so, and you don't have to worry
yeah.
about Zana or Zonner and,
Okay. Good
Cleo
point.
Child. So
Good point.
I've had it in my back pocket since I was like 16. I was like, I'm going to be Cleo Child. So that's why. And then you can find it on any streaming service. We're going to have it available on all of them. It's really
Wow.
important to me to, or at least definitely Spotify and YouTube, to make sure that it is a resource, or it's this, it's, I didn't want to gatekeep it. I wanted to make sure that it could be a resource for people to listen to and to find solace potentially, or whatever they want to find from it. And so I wanted to make sure that that was available for everyone. And I'm just really proud, I think. I'm really proud of what the album is. I'm really proud of everyone's contributions to it. It is more than me at this point. It is a lot of people's effort and tears and sweat and love and care that has gone into this.
Mhm.
And so it is a testament to everyone. And my name might be on it, but that does not mean that I am the only person that contributed and I'm the only person that has made it great. It is a work that a lot of people contributed to. And I'm very grateful from all of them. And I hope that it resonates, and
Mhm.
I hope that I know that it is truthful to me. And if it can be anything to anyone else, then I hope for the best. And if it's nothing to anyone other than a nice story, then that's also nice. I just
Yeah.
excited to share it, really.
Awesome. Well, and now people from my podcast will find it as well. And hopefully they'll feel a little bit of solace listening to your album, but also just hearing your story that you so beautifully shared with us here today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Reese. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Cleo for coming on and sharing her story so beautifully and so honestly, and for sharing her gift of poetry to the world. What a beautiful gift she's sharing. You can find Cleo on her website, cleochilds.com, CleoChilds. Link is in the description. You can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. You can also find me on all the socials. I'm on, well, not all. I keep saying all. I'm not on all the socials, but I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I am all at Nikki the Death Doula. Please come check me out there, follow me, leave comments. Let me know what your answer to the death debt question was. That might spark some heated debates. So maybe, I don't know, up to you, but be nice. Just be kind to people who might have different opinions than you. That is all. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. And remember, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck.